Hello again. A reporter from American broadcaster CNN has found herself in the middle of a scandal. The classified State Department emails show she was receiving orders from a government official. In January 2013, Elise Labott was covering a Senate hearing on the U.S. Embassy attack in Benghazi. The emails show she coordinated her posts on Twitter with Philip Raines, who was Assistant Deputy Secretary of State at the time. In the email, Raines writes to Labott about an idea for a tweet. Labott says she will get back to him and writes several minutes later that the job is done. And here is that tweet that Raines came up with and that Labott later posted. Now, it quotes Hillary Clinton saying she could have kept it all classified, but that is not her way. That is not who I am. And several hours later, Labott and Raines were in touch again. The reporter was apparently double-checking details of Senator Rand Paul's attendance at the inquiry, so that she could claim later in the tweet that he was absent and reject his criticism as irrelevant. She writes, Paul is a little late to the Benghazi game. Author and war correspondent Chris Hedges says journalists depend on access to political elites and are willing to give up many things for that.
That is a relationship that very swiftly and almost usually becomes incestuous, whether it's at the New York Times or CNN or anywhere else, because in essence these journalists depend on access to these elites in order to do their job, and they're not going to get access unless they not only placate but oftentimes carry water for these elites, and that's just basically what's been exposed. There are always those within the media who are willing to serve as, in essence, courtiers to the powerful, and that's basically what almost all journalists do in Washington.
But of course, CNN doesn't like to be accused of close ties to the government. A year ago, the channel edited such criticism out of an interview they held with RT's Anissa Nawi.
Yes, of course, we also cite the Russian perspective, and of course, maybe even more so, because that's the perspective that we feel is being sidelined.
Well, that's what went on air. And here's the part that didn't make it to the show.
Do we show more of a Russian perspective? Of course we do, because that's the perspective that's being sidelined. But it's an absurd question coming from someone that's propagated the line of the State Department for over 15 years. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. You've propagated the line of the State Department for over 15 years, starting with Yugoslavia and all the way into Syria.
Well, Chris Hedges again says officials often trade information for favorable coverage.
Those who are in power are not going to leak to them information unless they feel that those journalists will, if not always, certainly often, promote their interests. And that's precisely what we have seen. These reporters, whose careers depended on open access to those who were powerful and essentially made their careers by passing on those narratives.
To another story we're following this news hour. The chief rabbi of Brussels has described the fear on the streets of Belgium following the recent terrorist attacks in Paris. He claims Jewish people are concluding there's no future for them in Europe. It comes as the number of anti-Semitic attacks in several European countries has risen since the beginning of 2015. The incidents include vandalism and verbal and physical abuse. The president of the Belgian League Against Anti-Semitism believes an alarming pattern is emerging.
Jews in Europe are starting to leave their countries. They are going to Israel, to US, to Canada or other countries because it became difficult and even dangerous to live as a Jew in Europe. We see that since 10 years in Europe, which was built on one promise. This promise is never again. So again in Europe, Jews are killed because they are Jews.
Earlier this year, an Orthodox Jew recorded the reaction of passers-by to a man wearing a kippah, the traditional Jewish head covering, while walking around Paris. Joel Rubenfeld says in response to increasing anti-Semitic sentiment, EU authorities have to ensure the security of Jews' rights across the continent.
All over Europe, on a daily basis, Jews who are insulted, harassed, even sometimes physically assaulted because they are Jews. But I think that we have to fight back. I think that all European fellow citizens, that all European governments, that on the judicial branch, the executive branch and the legislative branch, they have to ensure the security of Jews in Europe. Because, make no mistake, today everyone is a target of those new totalitarians, which are the Islamists. So it's not an issue about Jews, it's an issue about the future of European democracy. That's what is at stake today.
Hundreds of refugees trying to cross the Greek border into Macedonia have clashed with police. The migrants, mostly from Pakistan and Bangladesh, tried to break through security barriers. Macedonia recently introduced new rules for asylum seekers, welcoming only refugees from Syria, Afghanistan and Iraq. Scuffles have broken out in the Ecuadorian capital, where plans for constitutional change have angered many. The proposed amendments could see the country's president elected for a third term. The demonstrators say the changes would be, quote, an abuse of power. Berlin police have arrested 2 men of Syrian and Tunisian origin in separate raids. Authorities were reacting to a tip-off about planned attacks on the city of Dortmund. No weapons or explosives were found during the raids. The men have been charged with plotting a terror attack. And changing gears, movers and shakers in Cuba have attempted to set a world record for the biggest salsa event. Nearly 200 people took up the challenge. They formed 2 giant circles, dancing and changing partners. Authorities closed main roads in the capital, Havana, for the event. Looking good there. Up next, the former Chancellor and Foreign Minister of Austria discusses the way the EU is dealing with the fallout from the Paris attacks. That's in Sophie Co.